Can I fix it for food? They mocked the ex-convict, not knowing he was an automotive legend. Get out of here before I call the police. Charles Santos' shout echoed through Premium Auto Shop, making all the employees stop what they were doing to look. In the center of the commotion, a man of about 45 remained motionless, his calloused hands holding a worn cap, his eyes fixed on the oil-stained concrete floor. John Smith had just gotten out of prison 3 weeks ago. 5 years earlier, a fight that started as self-defense ended with him being convicted of assault. 5 years had destroyed everything: his shop, his reputation, his relationships. Now, with only $23 in his pocket and clothes donated by the church, he had walked 8 blocks there after hearing the unmistakable sound of an engine with serious problems. "Please, sir," John said, his voice hoarse from someone who had spent too much time in silence. "I just want to help. I heard the noise from the red Mercedes when it passed on the street. The problem isn't what you're thinking." Charles laughed loudly, a cruel sound that made the other mechanics, Andrew, Richard, and Frank, exchange uncomfortable glances. "You heard the noise? Man, you don't even have a proper place to live, and you want to teach me about German cars that cost more than your entire life." The Mercedes owner, Ana Costa, a 38-year-old lawyer, had been leaning against a wall for 2 hours watching 3 professional mechanics fail miserably at diagnosing why her $80,000 car simply died at traffic lights. She had a crucial hearing in 4 hours, a case that could define her career, and was stuck there watching her only chance to arrive on time slip through her fingers. "Charles," she interrupted, "they've been at this for 2 hours. What harm could it do to let him take a look?" "Mrs. Costa, please," Charles replied, wiping his dirty hands on an already filthy towel. "This is a serious establishment. We can't let just anyone work on your car." John stepped forward, ignoring the hostile looks. "The camshaft position sensor is sending an inconsistent signal to the ECU. That's why the engine cuts out at idle. You're looking for a mechanical problem, but modern cars fail due to electronics." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the industrial fan spinning on the ceiling. Andrew, the youngest mechanic, frowned. Richard and Frank looked at each other with an expression John knew well, the same one he saw on guards' faces when they didn't know if he was bluffing or really knew something they didn't. Charles forced a laugh, but there was something different in his voice. "Camshaft sensor? Man, you can't even say the parts' names correctly, and you want to impress us." "Camshaft position sensor," John repeated in technical English, his eyes meeting Anna's for the first time. "When it partially fails, the ECU enters protection mode and cuts injection. It's code P0016 or P0017, depending on the cylinder." Anna felt something stir in her chest. There was a calmness in that man, a quiet certainty that brutally contrasted with the nervous arrogance of mechanics. "How do you know so much about this?" John hesitated. For a moment, his eyes revealed a depth that didn't match the worn clothes and unshaven face. "I've worked with cars my whole life." "Where?" Charles pressed, clearly uncomfortable. "Several places." John replied evasively, but something in his posture changed. For a second, Anna saw not an ex-convict asking for food, but a man who had once commanded respect, who had once known exactly who he was. Charles Santos wasn't just arrogant. He was dangerous when he felt threatened. At 52 years old, he had built his reputation at Premium Auto by exploiting rich clients' insecurity and their ignorance about mechanics. He charged fortunes for unnecessary repairs, always with that confident smile that hid his real technical mediocrity. "Listen here, convict." Charles spat the words like venom, approaching John with clenched fists. "You might impress the lady with your technical words, but I know exactly what you are. A desperate criminal trying to pass as a mechanic." Andrew, Richard, and Frank became uncomfortable, but none of them dared to intervene. They had known Charles for years. They knew he was capable of firing anyone who questioned his authority, and automotive jobs weren't easy to find in that city. Anna watched the tension grow, but something in John's behavior intrigued her deeply. While Charles became more aggressive, John remained calm, almost experienced in dealing with intimidation. "Mr. Santos," she said, "my car still isn't working, and it's been 2.5 hours. "It will work, Mrs. Costa. I just need more time to do the job correctly." not these street tricks he's suggesting. John stepped back, but his eyes didn't leave Charles. I can prove I'm right. Give me 5 minutes and an OBD scanner. Scanner? Charles laughed with contempt. You don't even know how much equipment like that costs. Our diagnostic machine is worth $15,000. Then use it. John replied simply, if I'm wrong about the error code, I'll leave and never bother you again. The proposal caught Charles off guard. He had bet that John was bluffing, but now he was cornered. If he accepted and John was right, his credibility would be destroyed in front of an important client. If he refused, he would seem afraid of an ex-convict. And what do you get if you're right? Charles asked, trying to sound superior. A sandwich? John replied without hesitation. Anything. I haven't eaten since yesterday. The silence was embarrassing. Anna felt her heart tighten, imagining a man going hungry, while 3 incompetent mechanics wasted her time and money. Charles, do the test. Charles took a deep breath, knowing he had no choice. He brought the scanner, connected it to the Mercedes, and navigated to the menus with deliberately slow movements, hoping John wouldn't know how to interpret the codes. But when the screen showed P0016, camshaft/crankshaft position correlation, Charles's face visibly paled. John didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He simply nodded. Camshaft sensor, bank 1. Like I said. Andrew let out a low whistle. Man, he hit it right on the mark. Richard and Frank looked at each other, clearly impressed, but Charles exploded. Luck. It was pure guesswork. Anyone can guess a code by chance. Then test another car, John suggested calmly. That blue pickup out there. The owner complained about steering wheel vibration at high speed, right? It's not an alignment problem like you think. Anna looked out the window and really saw a blue pickup parked. How did John know about it? Charles was red with rage, but Anna stepped forward. Do the test, Charles. I'll pay for the diagnostics. The test on the pickup revealed exactly what John had predicted, a problem with the drive shaft that the mechanics hadn't identified. Then came the black sedan. John diagnosed a cooling system leak just by listening to the engine for 10 seconds. With each correct diagnosis, Charles became more furious and desperate. This ex-convict was publicly humiliating his professional competence, and worse still, he was doing it in front of clients who paid thousands of dollars for his services. This doesn't prove anything. Charles finally shouted, You might have worked as an assistant in some fifth-rate shop before going to prison. That doesn't make you a real mechanic. John stopped and looked directly at Charles for the first time. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made everyone in the shop pay attention. You're right. I'm not a real mechanic. Charles smiled triumphantly, but John continued. I'm an automotive engineer graduated from MIT. And before prison, I designed engines that you would never have capacity to understand, let alone fix. The impact of that revelation was like a bomb exploding in slow motion. But what no one could imagine was that this wasn't even half the truth about who John Smith really was. The silence after the MIT revelation lasted only a few seconds, but it seemed like an eternity. Andrew was the first to break the ice, his voice coming out in a whisper. MIT? Man, are you serious? John nodded, but there was something more in his eyes, an old pain that didn't relate only to prison. Graduated in 2018. Specialization in hybrid propulsion systems. Anna felt her lawyer instinct activate. There were inconsistencies in the story. If John was so qualified, what had really happened for him end up in jail? John, can I ask you a personal question? Before he could answer, Charles exploded again, but now there was desperation in his voice. MIT or not, you're an ex-convict. Criminal. No matter how many degrees you have, you're dangerous. Dangerous. John repeated the word as if it were foreign. Mr. Santos, I never heard anyone who didn't try to hurt me first. The way he said it, calm, factual, without emotion, made Anna realize something important. John wasn't offending himself like an innocent person. He was being honest about who he was, and that included recognizing that he had, indeed, hurt someone. Richard approached cautiously. John, man, if you understand so much about cars, why didn't you open your own shop when you got out of prison? The question caught John off guard. For a moment, his mask of tranquility cracked, revealing a deep vulnerability, because no one hires ex-convicts, much less to work on expensive cars, and because he hesitated, because some things you lose can't be recovered. Anna observed the interaction with growing interest. As a criminal lawyer, she knew that look. It was the same one she saw in her clients' eyes when they talked about the real consequences of the prison system. Not just a lost time, but the permanently closed doors, the complete destruction of a previous life. And about the Mercedes, she asked directly, "Can you really fix it?" John looked at the car, then at her. "I can, but I'll need two things." "What?" "First, access to the scanner for 10 more minutes. Second," he looked at Charles with an expression that wasn't hostile, but also wasn't friendly, "for him to stop interfering with me." Charles started to protest, but Anna interrupted him. "Charles, leave the shop. Go get some coffee. Mrs. Costa, I can't leave a criminal alone with your car." "He won't be alone. Andrew, Richard, and Frank will stay here. And so will I." Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in courtrooms. "Now leave." Charles left, slamming the door, muttering profanities, but not before casting a look of pure hatred at John. It was a look of a man who knew his incompetence was being exposed and who was planning revenge. With Charles gone, the atmosphere in the shop changed completely. John approached the Mercedes and opened the hood with precise, economical movements. His hands moved like a surgeon's, each gesture calculated without waste. "Andrew, can you bring me a Phillips No. 2 screwdriver and a 10mm wrench?" Andrew brought the tools, watching fascinated as John located the components without hesitation, without consulting a manual, without wasting time searching. "How do you know where everything is?" Richard asked. "Because I help design systems like this." John replied, carefully removing the defective sensor. "I worked at Mercedes as a consultant between 2019 and 2021. Anna felt her jaw drop. "You worked at Mercedes-Benz?" "Research and Development Division. Direct injection systems for turbo engines." John examined the sensor under the light. "This one has a micro crack in the encapsulation. It allows moisture entry, causing inconsistent readings." Frank came closer. "Man, this is incredible. You're like a car genius." John didn't respond immediately. He was installing a new sensor that Andrew had found in stock, his movements fluid and confident. "I was," he said finally, "before everything collapsed." Anna couldn't contain herself. "John, what happened? Why were you imprisoned?" He stopped working and looked at her directly. "Because I defended a woman who was being assaulted by 3 men in a parking lot. One of them didn't survive the head injury." The brutal honesty of the answer left everyone silent. There was no self-pity, no attempt at justification, just the facts. "And because of that you lost everything?" she asked softly. "Lost my job, house, fiancé. John returned to work on the engine. Lost a life it took me 15 years to build, because of a decision I made in 30 seconds. Richard swallowed hard. "Man, but you did the right thing. The right thing cost me 5 years of freedom and a reputation I'll never recover." John closed the hood and cleaned his hands. "But I'd do it again." Anna started the Mercedes. The engine purred perfectly, smooth as silk. For the first time in weeks, her car worked as it should. "Unbelievable," she murmured, getting out of the vehicle. "How did you do this in 15 minutes when it took 3 hours with no results?" John shrugged. "They were looking for common problems. I know the rare ones." At that moment, Anna made a decision that would change everything. "John, I need to make you a proposal. But first," she looked around to make sure Charles hadn't returned, "I need you to know that I discovered something about you that you don't even suspect yet." "What did you discover about me?" John asked, a new tension appearing in his voice. Anna took her phone from her pocket and showed a photo on the screen. It was John, younger, dark hair, well cut, smiling next to a Formula One car. "You're not just John Smith, engineer. You're John Lightning Smith, former Indy Car Series pilot." The world stopped. Andrew, Richard, and Frank looked from the photo to John, trying to process the information. The shabby man who had asked for food in exchange for work was an American motorsport legend. Impossible, Richard whispered. Lightning Smith disappeared after that accident in 2019. John closed his eyes, as if the memory were a physical wound. I didn't disappear. I died that day. The man you're seeing is just what's left. Anna approached slowly. John, you won 12 IndyCar races. You were third in the championship in 2018. You were considered one of the most promising drivers in history. And then I crashed at 280 kilometers per hour in Indianapolis. John replied bitterly. 3 months in the hospital. 2 years of physical therapy. And when I finally returned to the tracks, I discovered that being afraid to die doesn't go well with high-speed racing. Andrew shook his head in disbelief. Man, you were my hero when I was a teenager. I watched all your races. You're a hero. John laughed without humor. Andrew, I was a coward who abandoned the sport because he lost his courage. Then I became an ex-convict begging for food at a shop. I'm nobody's hero. That's when Charles returned, bringing with him 2 men in suits, clearly authorities of some kind. His face displayed a malicious smile of triumph. Folks, these are inspectors from the State Automotive Regulation Commission. I came to report that we have a criminal operating illegally in our shop. One of the inspectors stepped forward. Mr. Smith, I need to see your license to work with motor vehicles. John didn't respond. He simply stood there, knowing he didn't possess any license. And your current work permit, the second inspector added. He doesn't have any of that, Charles said triumphantly. He's an ex-convict operating illegally. I want him removed immediately. Anna felt rage explode in her chest. Wait a moment. This man just solved a problem that 3 licensed mechanics couldn't solve in 3 hours. Ma'am, that's irrelevant, the first inspector replied. Automotive work without a license is a crime. Mr. Smith, you're being fined. John accepted the fine in silence, but Anna wasn't finished. Inspectors, can I ask some questions about Mr. Santos before you leave? Charles paled. What are you talking about? Anna smiled. It was a smile she used in court when she was about to destroy a witness. Well, since we're talking about regulations. She took out her phone and started recording. Charles, can you explain why you charged Mrs. Wilson $4,800 to rebuild her Audi's engine last week? What does this have to do with? Especially considering the problem was just a $40 thermostat valve? Anna continued mercilessly. I have here the report from an independent expert who examined the work. Charles's face turned red. You can't prove anything. Yes, I can. Anna turned to the inspectors. Gentlemen, I have documentation of at least 15 cases in the last 2 years where this establishment charged for unnecessary services, using counterfeit parts as originals, and performing repairs that actually caused more damage. Andrew, Richard, and Frank looked at each other. They all knew Anna was right. They had witnessed Charles ordering unnecessary corrections to inflate budgets. This is slander, Charles stuttered. It's justice, Anna replied. And here's the best part. She showed another document. Mr. Santos, your own license to operate a mechanic shop expired 8 months ago. You've been operating illegally longer than anyone in this room. The silence was deafening. The inspectors looked at Charles with a completely different expression. Mr. Santos, the first inspector said slowly, you'll need to come with us for clarification. Wait, Charles shouted, panicking. You can't. I reported him first. And we thank you for the report, the second inspector replied. We'll also investigate the accusations against Mr. Smith. But first, let's resolve your own irregularities. As Charles was escorted out, Anna turned to John. John, I have a proposal for you. How about we become partners? John looked at her confused. Partners in what? I buy this shop. You manage it, legally with all necessary licenses. Anna smiled. Smith and Costa Automotive. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Andrew exploded in celebration. Man, that would be incredible. Richard and Frank joined the shouts of approval, but John remained silent, processing the proposal. Why would you do this for me? He finally asked. Anna looked directly into his eyes. Because sometimes life gives us a second chance to do the right thing. And because, John Smith, you're not just an ex-convict or an ex-pilot. You're someone who still has much to offer the world. And at that moment, for the first time in 5 years, John felt something he had completely forgotten: hope. 6 months later, John was standing in front of Smith & Costa Automotive, watching the line of luxury cars waiting for service. The shop had become the most sought after in the city, not just for fair prices, but for exceptional technical competence. Andrew approached carrying a report. "John, we closed this month with an 847% increase in revenue compared to the previous management. And look at this, we have a 3-week waiting list." John smiled, a genuine smile that had taken months to reappear. "And the guys? Are Richard and Frank adapting well? They're the best employees we've ever had. You completely transformed how they see the profession." The truth was that John had done more than reform a shop. He had created a family. Richard now attended night classes in mechanical engineering, inspired by his boss's example. Frank had discovered a talent for electronic diagnostics and became a specialist in hybrid systems. Andrew took over administrative management, freeing John to concentrate on the most complex cases. Anna entered the shop, carrying coffee and the morning newspapers. "John, you need to see this." She opened the newspaper to the business section, showing an article with a photo of both of them in front of the shop. "From prison to success, how an ex-convict became the city's most sought-after mechanic." John read aloud. "Anna, you shouldn't have given that interview." "Of course I should have. People need to know that second chances work when given to the right people." Anna sat at the table next to him. "By the way, I have news." "What kind of news?" Charles was sentenced to 2 years in prison for commercial fraud and forming a scheme to harm consumers. 15 families were fully compensated. John nodded, but there was no satisfaction in his expression. "And his license? Permanently revoked. He can never operate in the automotive area again." Anna observed his reaction. "You don't seem satisfied." "I don't take pleasure in anyone's downfall," John replied. "Charles was incompetent and dishonest, but destroying someone's life doesn't bring me joy." Richard appeared at the door, interrupting the conversation. "John, there's a guy here who wants to talk to you. Says he's a journalist from Motorsports International." John and Anna looked at each other. The specialized automotive press had started connecting the dots between mechanic John Smith and ex-pilot Lightning Smith. The journalist, a middle-aged man named Luis Mendez, introduced himself respectfully. "Mr. Smith, I'd like to ask some questions about your transition from motorsports to mechanics." "There was no transition," John replied honestly. "There was an end and a new beginning." "But, sir, you're only 45 years old. Many drivers your age are still competing. Have you never considered returning?" John looked through the shop window, seeing Andrew patiently explaining a diagnosis to an elderly client, Richard helping a single mother with an affordable budget, Frank teaching a teenager about preventive maintenance. "Luis," he said finally, "when I raced, my success only benefited myself. Here, my work changes dozens of people's lives every day. Why would I trade that for trophies?" The journalist wrote down the answer, clearly impressed. "And about prejudice? How did you deal with people who judged you just for being an ex-convict?" John thought about Charles, the initial humiliation, the hunger he endured, the nights sleeping outdoors. Prejudice only has power over you if you believe you deserve to be treated badly. When you know who you really are, other people's opinions become just noise. Anna smiled, proud of the wisdom John had developed through pain. "One last question," the journalist said. "What advice would you give to people going through the worst moment of their lives?" John stood up and walked to the framed photo on the wall. Him and Ann on the shop's opening day, surrounded by Andrew, Richard, Frank, and dozens of satisfied customers. That rock bottom isn't your permanent address. It's just a place where you stop digging and start climbing. He turned to Luis. 5 years ago, I was sleeping on park benches, rejected by everyone. Today, I have a thriving business, employees who trust me, and a partner who believes in my potential. And what was the secret of the transformation? John looked at Anna, who nodded encouragingly. Finding people willing to see beyond your mistakes and focus on what you can still become. And mainly, forgiving yourself for past mistakes. After the journalist left, the shop returned to its normal pace. John was at the end of the workday, organizing tools, when a young man of about 20 approached timidly. "Mr. Smith, my name is Diego. I got out of jail last week. I heard your story on the radio, and I want to know if you have any openings." John looked at the young man. He saw in his eyes the same mixture of hope and desperation that he himself had felt months ago. "Do you understand cars, Diego?" "Not much, sir, but I can learn. I can work hard." John smiled. "Anna, do we have room for one more apprentice?" "We always have room for those who want to start over," she replied. And at that moment, John completely understood the cycle of life. He had received a second chance from Anna, and now he was passing it forward to Diego. The true victory wasn't just about his own redemption, but about his ability to become the bridge that others needed to cross their own abysses. 6 months after asking to fix a car in exchange for food, John Smith had discovered something more valuable than any racing trophy: the transformative power of giving people exactly what he most needed when he was lost, an opportunity to prove their worth. If this story of new beginnings and overcoming inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove it's never too late to rewrite your own life narrative.